Now, how often do you pay for goods or services with cold, hard cash? The chances are not as much as you used to. With the relentless growth of card and contactless payments, the use of notes and coins has sharply declined. But while digitalisation has delivered many benefits, there are widespread concerns that the shift towards a more cashless society is leaving many people behind. In a moment, a panel of guests reflect on the revolution. But first, this report from Laura Alderman.
This 140-year-old place of worship, there's a very 21st century way to show your faith. No cash for the collection plate, no bother. Hallelujah. Worshippers can now pledge their support with card payments and contactless giving.
People are now in much more control of what they give, how they give, and this is just a simple way of trying to acknowledge that people don't have as much cash in their pocket as they used to. They pay for shopping with phones. Why not give a gift to God with their phone as well?
It seems that more of us than ever before are ditching notes and coins for plastic payments. 2 years ago, card payments overtook cash for the first time, and it's been soaring since then. In fact, a recent report found that 1 in 10 Brits now never carry any physical cash. Driven by trends and consumer needs, Scottish businesses are watching closely and adapting. In a few months, this Edinburgh coffee shop will be a cash-free zone. And for staff, the reasons to make the move have been stacking up.
Issues with fake notes, issues with the old notes which are still in circulation and taking them. There's a security concern about having cash in the store. I would much prefer to get caught in cybersecurity than to have to risk the security of my own staff. We started about 5.5, almost 6 years ago. At that point, we were 24% card transactions. In the first 6 months of this year, in 2019, we're now 74%.
It's not just small businesses who are trying to get ahead of the curve. Contactless payments were recently trialled at the Big Issue.
I think it's been a real success. We've seen our vendors increasing their sales. It's something that we really need to work with our vendors on because we're moving towards a cashless society and we need to lower all the barriers for our vendors to be able to continue the work they do.
And sizing up their options, the charity sector is also on board.
We're thinking about things like contactless and how we might be able to utilise that, both in terms of buckets and static cans in shops. And we're also thinking about clever uses of online platforms. Now there are lots of different ways that we can use gadgets and technology to make that process much quicker and easier.
But how feasible is it that we could one day realistically live in a cashless society? To pay by card, you need a bank account, something that more than 1 million people in the UK don't have. And for the vendor who's accepting the payment, well, they'll need reliable and fast internet access. Combine that with bank closures across the country and the slow disappearance of these. Have we gone too far, too fast?
Which research has previously found that more than 3/4 of pensioners and those on a low income are particularly reliant on cash. So those groups of people are certainly likely to suffer in a cashless society. But they're far from the only people who are particularly reliant on cash. We know that those with mental health issues, those with physical disabilities are also generally more reliant on cash. Perhaps they find it a valuable budgeting tool. It's a way of them preserving their independence.
Internet and cellular connectivity is really poor in the area, and we really struggle to take card payments as well. If the internet doesn't work, you can't work.
This salon is only 10 miles northwest of Aberdeen, but they face a daily struggle with connectivity and rely on cash.
We can stand for 4 or 5 minutes trying to take somebody's card payment, and they've got to leave, they've got places to be, we've got customers to see, and it really does impact on the rest of our day. When we first opened the salon, to get 3G signal, I had to go out and stand in the car park, and that doesn't look very professional at all.
And when the payments do go through, Gillian says she's then had to shell out thousands of pounds in monthly charges just for having the card machine.
If we were to become a cashless society, then I think the government needs to do something where it wouldn't cost us to take card payments because it doesn't cost us to take cash payments.
You're winning, take it.
One country at the cutting edge of digital payments is Sweden. They're aiming to be completely cashless by 2023.
We love technology and we are not afraid of using it. And I think that's one reason almost all Swedes are adapting new technology quite fast. Approximately 90% of all payments are made using a credit card today. Actually, when I look in my wallet, I think I maybe got like a £20 note or something like that, but I don't remember when I put it there because I haven't used real cash for at least this year.
But thousands of miles away in the United States, the idea of a cash-free world is in its infancy.
I think most consumers in the United States understand that when they use a payment processing other than just cash, is there are ways to go ahead and be tracked and identified and potentially matched across different databases.
Back at home, it's feared that Scots might be sleepwalking into a cashless society. And while we desire to embrace new technologies that make our lives easier, it might still be too rash to ditch the cash.
Well, to discuss some of the pros and cons of a more cashless society, we brought together the financial services specialist, Gary Fegan, the writer, campaigner and former broker, Brett Scott, and Derek Young, the policy officer for Citizens Advice Scotland. Gary, you're an enthusiast for a cashless society. What do you see as the main benefits?
I think convenience is the main benefit with cashless. You can't lose money that's on a card. It's faster, it's easier to transfer from person to person, rather than the old check in a birthday card from your granny or a £10 note going through the post. So I think just the convenience and the ability to track your spending and budget effectively, knowing where your money is going, being able to see what you're going to spend it on is the most beneficial thing for me.
Brett, what do you think about what Gary says there? It is easier to track your money and it's more convenient.
I think the convenience point is probably one of the least important elements of this debate. I mean, in reality, whether you shave 2 seconds off your transaction time is quite irrelevant for most people. It's the thing that's most focused upon in this debate, but really the real things we should be thinking about is who actually controls these systems. And the key difference with cash versus digital money systems is that cash is something that happens on the spot locally, whereas digital money takes place between two banks on your behalf, so they can see everything you do, they can get in between everybody, and there's a lot of politics to that.
Gary, what's your response to that? You know, it's the banks that have the control.
They do. They provide the mechanism or the rails for passing that money to and forth. The sad fact is that even if the banks want to, most banks can't actually mine that data and do anything constructive about it anyway. But that doesn't prevent them in the future from doing that. But we have a contract with the bank. We trust the banks that they are doing this in our best interest. And despite the sort of financial crash, I think that trust still exists.
Should we not trust the banks, Brett? Do you not?
I mean, I think you just got to zoom out and look at the politics of this. What we refer to as quote-unquote going cashless is basically the process via which you move away from the state money system, which is the cash system, towards a bank-controlled system. So actually what we should say, rather than saying the cashless society, we should call it what it is, which is the bank-full society. And once you grasp that point, you can see all the things that emerge from that. All the inclusion issues emerge from that. For example, who do they want to include, who they don't want to include? All the surveillance issues emerge from that, but a whole bunch of resilience issues emerge from that too. So for example, in the States, one of the big things that the Federal Reserve looks at is as big weather events are approaching or big hurricanes, people desperately want cash because they don't want their money stuck in a digital form in the banking system. So there's all these kind of resilient systems. If your systems go down, you've got a big problem if people have turned away from cash.
We could explore that issue in just a wee second, but Derek, to bring you in, I mean, you've got concerns that this shift towards a cashless society is leaving people behind.
Well, for a lot of people, going cashless can be more convenient. So for about 80% of people, it doesn't prove a fundamental problem. But there are particular groups who it can affect most adversely. Top of the list is people who are on low incomes and who have to manage their money really quite closely. having the tangible physical cash in their hands is a very useful money management tool where you really have to watch every penny. It's much easier to do that when the money's actually in your hands. Whereas for virtual money, it's a bit ethereal, a bit distant. Sometimes it can not be fully up to date, your balance, if there have been payments that haven't been fully processed yet. So it's particularly important for those kind of groups. There's a statistic that if you're living on £10,000 a year in your income, you're 14 times more likely to be reliant on cash than if you earn 30,000. And really, the dependence on cash really does increase as you go down the income scale. There's also older people have a more preference for cash. They actually use bank cards as much as the rest of the adult population. They're far less likely to use smartphone apps and so on. But if they are in rural areas or if they feel isolated, that can affect them more as well.
I mean, Gary, what do you make of that? I mean, there are some people that just aren't equipped to deal with this digitalisation, and it's important for them to feel the cash.
So I think there's a big shortfall in education for digital in general and financial literacy. So if you ask the person on the street what APR actually means, they probably couldn't tell you correctly. And I think, you know, the change in regulation around overdrafts reflects this again. But again, they're now saying what an APR, an overdraft costs you an APR, not actually in pounds and pence, how much that actually costs you. So I think there's a whole requirement for financial education that I believe the banks have a duty to do, and to teach people how to use the newer tools that are coming out that allow you to budget, the digital banks that are now updated in real time as well, that would solve a lot of these problems that legacy banks give.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, you may not like it, but is this not a natural progression? And we heard Gary there talking about it's about educating people as well. And, you know, youngsters of today, you know, they'll be totally on board for this.
Yeah, sure. So that story you just told is basically what the banking sector loves to hear, right? So in essence, they control the narrative completely in the public debate. Because in the public, if you ask people, there is a sense this is just a natural bottom-up progress, right? But if you look at what's actually been going on for the last 20, 30 years, there's been an overt process trying to get people off the cash system. The banks hate the cash system. They lose money from the cash system. Visa and MasterCard, all these big companies who have a lot of institutional power and a lot of cultural power, have a very, very large vested interests in making this a reality.
But Brett, what do you want to see happening? It seems to me that the ball has started rolling, and I don't see how you can stop it.
Yeah, well, precisely. So what's actually going on? If you want to understand the real politics of this here, which will start to kick in, is the state money system, which is the base money system upon which all the bank money systems are based, is being eroded. All right, and actually the central banks are starting to realize this. They're getting worried. For example, in Sweden, which has the highest level of bank sort of domination of the payment system, it's the central banks there that are getting worried, right? Because they realize that the entire bank digital money system is predicated upon getting access to state money. So, for example, if there's a banking crisis, where do people go? So what the banks are currently doing when they're shutting down all the ATMs and when they're trying to wean people off the system is they're trying to blow up the off-ramps so you can to sort of stop you exiting their systems. And that has huge political implications. And this fixation upon the sort of apparently natural process is really in the bank's political interest. That people think that.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's unstoppable now? And what concerns me is, you know, Brett talked about, you know, when things go wrong, and last year was it Visa?
And MasterCard.
Visa, and there was an IT failure, and there was 5.2 million transactions didn't go through. I mean, that could, on a bigger scale, that could bring down societies, couldn't it?
Just a few days ago, Uruguay, Paraguay lost all power, and you had 42 million people without electricity for a number of hours. So, you know, any infrastructure, a large-scale infrastructure failure is going to have consequences. If you're in Tesco or Sainsbury's and the electricity goes out, the girl or boy at the till is not going to top things up on a bit of paper. You're going to just have to abandon your trolley. Now, the corner shop might not be so affected, but any big infrastructure will have consequences. And I don't think just having cash would be manageable.
But the thing about cash is it is tangible, it is mobile, and when you're talking about situations that a crisis or the people on edge, having cash actually does form a form of reassurance for a lot of people, particularly if they're got mental health issues, they are comfortable with things they are more familiar with. It gives them a sense of security.
And Derek, a lot of people don't have bank accounts. It was 140,000. I mean, that's astonishing figure, and that's in Scotland. So who are these people, and why don't they have bank accounts?
Well, for a variety of reasons, they may not have had to ever open a bank account. Some people are coming into the banking system now for the first time because they're claiming universal credit, for example, which requires these things to be carried out online, whereas before you could get cash payments at the post office, or you could get cash payments through the job centre. And it's possible to live a perfectly happy life and be able to manage your affairs really effectively on a cash-based system. Just because we're not familiar with that, it's not the way that a lot of people live. There were no particular problems with it, but if people are forced, and they're not a choice that they make, but they are pushed into using digital payments when they don't really want to, that's when it can adversely affect them.
OK, Brett, we've heard your objections to a cashless society, but what do you want to see happening? How do you want to stop this and go back to having a cashless society? What can be done?
Well, things will have to be done at some point. I mean, in some ways, the sort of the banal kind of surface level debate that occurs about this all the time is, the sort of convenience and this day-to-day stuff, which really isn't very obvious actually for lots of people. Just one extra point to this: there's a huge class dynamic to this debate, which completely gets skirted over. There's a massive digital payment has always been spearheaded from urban elite populations. De facto, that's the case. If you ever spend time with sort of more informal economies, more working class populations, there's a distinct tendency towards cash. And actually a lot of this narrative that's being spun out of the innovation centers in London and so on is this idea that somehow if you want to rely on these non-digital systems, you're somehow backward or criminal, or there's something wrong with you. But there's lots of people historically who have actually been supported by cash and want to maintain access to it. And there's nothing wrong with them for wanting that. So actually one of the biggest things is going to be done is for the government itself to stop actively supporting the banking sector and its drive towards this well, basically the central bank government just step out of the way and essentially let the banking sector trample over the cash system.
All right, very, very briefly, Gary, what do you see happening in the future? Can you see Scotland being completely cashless in the near future?
I don't think we'll go cashless in the near future, because I don't think the infrastructure is up to it at the moment. I don't think the education is there for everyone to be comfortable. I don't think the digital applications are inclusive enough. I think they are, like Brett says, that they're crafted in innovation labs, but they don't have people with disabilities or maybe have learning difficulties in mind. It's more of the I'm 28 and I'm on a good salary and this is my lifestyle in Shoreditch. So I think the digital offerings will get to a point that we can go cashless, but I can't see that happening anytime soon.
OK, fascinating conversation there. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks.